You know, sometimes the environment and the economy can seem like they really hate each other, except maybe for local produce. I mean, you get to combine something that is so close to you and did not take much to transport from where it was produced to where you have bought it from. Therefore, you're reducing your food miles. So that means you reduce the amount of emissions of the food that you're buying, and that supports the environment, while at the same time you get to support your local economy by supporting your local farmer. This is a win-win situation. How can you go wrong with this? Well, apparently you can. Now bear with me here for a moment, because I'm going to explain something that might seem like it has nothing to do with local produce, but I will connect it. Now, something that is very critical and very important that affects the efficiency at which agricultural products are produced is specialization and trade, or in economic terms, something called comparative advantage. Now, comparative advantage is the idea that if each country produced what it is mostly capable of and traded that with other countries, we get an overall better economy than if each country produced everything on its own. By having the entire world function in the state, we get an overall optimal economy if everybody pretty much embraced comparative advantage. Let me give you an example here. Let's say that you're a country and I'm a country. Let's say that your country's climate, soil, and infrastructure really fits growing potatoes, and I'm another country has a soil, climate, and infrastructure that really fits growing tomatoes. The problem is both of our people need tomatoes and potatoes. Now, because you are good at making potatoes, let's say that you're dedicating half of your land to growing potatoes. So let's say that you grow 20 potatoes. Your other half is dedicated to growing tomatoes, but you're only able to grow 10 tomatoes because you are not good at. On the other hand, I am in the opposite situation. Because I'm good at growing tomatoes, half of my land I'm dedicating to growing tomatoes is able to produce 20 tomatoes. And the other half, because I'm not good at growing potatoes, I'm growing only 10 potatoes. Good so far? Excellent. Now let's say that things were fine for a while until population grew and people wanted more food. In your country, they say that the supply of potatoes is enough, but the number of tomatoes you're providing them is not enough. They want you to double that. They want 20 tomatoes, and it's the opposite. In my country, they say that there's not enough potatoes that I'm providing for them. They need double that. They need 20 potatoes. And if we don't give it to them anytime soon, they're going to kill us, because we've been dictators of both of our respective countries for a while. So how do we solve this conundrum? Let's say me and you, we meet in a coffee shop and discuss. Apparently dictators discuss that in coffee shops. Anyway, so I tell you my problem and you tell me your problem, and then we come up with a brilliant idea. Since you're really good at making potatoes, why don't you dedicate all of your land to growing potatoes? And me, since I'm really good at making tomatoes, why don't I dedicate all my land to growing tomatoes? Now you can grow 40 potatoes and I can grow 40 tomatoes. Here, take 20 tomatoes and give me 20 potatoes. That seems to be something that really works. It's almost like magic, but this is what a comparative advantage really is. But the benefits of comparative advantage do not end there. Comparative advantage on its own gives birth to something else that is also going to make your production more efficient, and it is, in this case, economies of scale. Now, economies of scale is the idea that as you produce more of something, the more good you become at it, and the less resources per unit that you're going to have to put for each one. Basically, your production becomes more efficient. So in our example, this means that you, even though you're producing 40 potatoes, you're probably producing more than that because you are dedicating a big chunk of your resources, actually all of your land, in order to produce those potatoes. And that means that, let's say, for example, economies of scale allows you to get 10 additional potatoes. So now totally you're producing 50. And me, I am, let's say, producing 10 extra tomatoes with the total production of 50. Now suddenly you have 10 excess potatoes and I have 10 excess tomatoes that what could you do with them? Yes, I know what you could do with them. You could take them and trade them with other countries for other goods and services that you think your country needs. This really is sorcery. How the hell are we not doing this? Except that we are. Otherwise, we wouldn't have what is effectively called today a global economy. You see the problem here. I highly suggest that you go and read, after you watch this video, an article by Steve Saxton on Freakonomics, link is in the description, where he explains both the comparative advantage and economies of scale in relation to agricultural products. Now, in this sense, this is why local produce, if it doesn't fit the environment that it is grown in, not in the environment in the sense of climate, soil, and infrastructure, and it is not produced at a large enough level in order for economies of scale to kick in really hard. Because if it doesn't really have any of those things, then this means chances are there's another producer out there that is not exactly so local that is able to provide agricultural products that are more efficient than the local producer. However, there's a very big problem with what I've said so far. I'm assuming that food gets transported instantly, which is an unrealistic thing. When I need to give you your 20 tomatoes and you need to give me my 20 potatoes, we have to spend some resources in getting it to each other. And that creates emissions and is a form of consumption. And that strains the environment. A very good reason why you should buy local is the fact that local produce doesn't really take much to go from the farm to the supermarket, and that means not that much strain on the environment. However, that might not exactly be such a big deal. In the article that I've told you about by Steve Saxton, he mentions a life cycle assessment study that says that on average, your US household, when it comes to the food that it consumes, transportation accounts only for 11% of the total emissions created during such products' life cycles. This is for food that traveled between 1,640 kilometers and 6,740 kilometers. The thing is, you can't arbitrarily call a food environmentally friendly or not just because it has, like, I don't know, 2-3 food miles. That does not make sense. In order for you to actually determine the greenliness of your food, when you show up in the supermarket, you have to do a life cycle assessment for everything that you're buying. Imagine that you're going and there's like 5 rows of apples, and each row of apple comes from a different source. You have to see how much emissions came from transportation, how much came from production, how much came from other sources, and so on and so forth for every type of apple that you're trying to buy. And once you do that, you can figure out which one created the least emissions and then just buy it. Yeah, that would make sense. But then when you move on, you also have to do that for the eggs, for the watermelons that you're buying, for the meat. You would have to do a life cycle assessment for everything that you're buying, which is just unrealistic and crazy. So what is the solution here? What exactly is the solution here? Well, it turns out that you can, on average, calculate how much emissions in a certain life cycle of a group of agricultural products that you can calculate. So it turns out, for example, that in the UK, half of the food system's greenhouse gases come from meat and dairy. And that makes sense because first you have to grow the grain, and then you have to transport the grain to the cow farms, and then the cow farms have to eat it, and then you have to slaughter the cows, and then you have to transport the cows again. Much more than conventional agricultural products. And that means you would pretty much have to eat differently. You could stop eating meat and dairy and start eating, other things. I'm not saying that you should become a vegetarian. I'm just saying that if you wanted to become more green with your food, it's better to stop thinking about it in terms of food miles, whether it's local or global, and think about it in terms of how much emissions, as a group, as an agricultural products group, this thing is actually creating. So if you stop eating meat and dairy, you would probably end up doing more good to the environment. Just by the way, I eat a lot of meat and dairy. I'm not exactly very environmentally friendly to the environment when it comes to my food. So don't. I'm giving you an advice, but I myself am not actually doing that because meat is delicious. I'm sorry, but it is. So yeah. So that's why local produce is not always so green. And with that, thank you very much.